Welcome to Bedcrime Stories Podcast. I'm your host, T. To all my bedcrimers, I hope you guys are having a great day wherever you are in the world. To anyone new here, thank you for coming to the channel and checking it out. Let me just ask that after listening to or watching the video, if you find you enjoyed it or learned something, please do me a favor and smash that like button. Now, we learned this week that suspect Bryan Kohberger was let go from his teaching assistant position at WSU on December 19th of 2022 due to behavioral problems. This bad news arrived just 10 days before a SWAT team showed up at Kohberger's parents' house in Pennsylvania to arrest him for the crime in Moscow, Idaho, where Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Xana Kernodle lost their lives. It's fascinating to note that Kohberger had been in hot water at WSU within 1 month of starting his first semester in August of 2022 as a student in criminology seeking a PhD and also starting this teaching assistant gig. According to News Nation, by September, Kohberger was already put under investigation at the school due to behavioral problems and for having what was described as sexist attitude toward women. Kohberger was reportedly given several warnings about his troublesome behavior and was even brought into a meeting with a group of professors to discuss it. The professors told Kohberger he was rude to women and graded them differently than his male students. News Nation did not say in what way specifically female students were graded differently than their male counterparts, but I suspect the females were getting less favorable marks. It's also been reported that Kohberger had multiple altercations with Professor John Snyder. Professor Snyder is an adjunct professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. He's also a criminal defense lawyer and has defended nearly every type of criminal case, from possession of illegal substances to first-degree blank. Professor Snyder teaches criminal law, criminal courts in America, criminal procedure, and evidence at WSU. One of Kohberger's run-ins with Professor Snyder occurred on September 23 of 2022. 10 days later, Snyder called Bryan into a meeting to discuss his professional behavior, or lack thereof. Per News Nation, after the meeting, Kohberger allegedly became even more feisty and belligerent and had arguments with other professors as well. A few weeks later, Snyder sent Kohberger an email in which he said the doctoral student had failed to meet expectations, and on November 2nd, just 11 days prior to the crime in Moscow, Idaho, Kohberger met with Professor Snyder to discuss an improvement plan. It's stunning to learn that a first-semester graduate student who'd been accepted into WSU's criminology program and had also been graced with a teaching position would have been behaving like this right out of the gate. You'd think he would have been walking on eggshells and trying to make a stellar impression on his professors. They didn't know him yet, and every grad student usually wants to excel. After all, his professors were basically his bosses, and they would later have the power to recommend him for teaching positions. More than a month later, after the crime in Moscow, Kohberger met again with several professors, including Snyder. Professor Snyder told Kohberger that he'd made no progress on becoming more professional, and on December 19th, as I already mentioned, Kohberger was let go from his teaching duties. How did a guy who thinks it's okay to disrespect his professors, his female classmates, and his female students with grading that did not align with what their male counterparts were getting, get this position in the first place? He must have been able to schmooze the professors in his interview before being accepted into the criminology program. He had to have shown bright to land the teaching assistant gig. Those positions are usually coveted. One of Kohberger's female professors at DeSales University, 33-year-old Professor Michelle Bolger, told the Daily Mail that she found Kohberger to be a great writer and a brilliant student. Bolger stated about Kohberger, and I quote, "In my 10 years of teaching, I've only recommended 2 students to a PhD program, and he was one of them. He was one of my best students ever. Everyone is in shock over this," end quote. Bolger also said that Kohberger was always perfectly professional with her. Bolger expressed that she was stunned that her former student had been charged in the shocking crime. So what went wrong from his years as a graduate student at DeSales University, where Professor Bolger obviously found him exceptional, to how he was behaving within the first month of his doctorate program at WSU? I'm also wondering if, as Kohberger drove to Washington to start on his new PhD, was he thinking about his exciting new life there as a student and as a teacher? Was he looking forward to meeting new friends in the criminology department? Maybe a pretty male classmate? Did he anticipate being accepted socially by his peers? Did he maybe think that he'd have more social success with females now that he was working on his PhD and also working as a teaching assistant? Did he take a dark spiral after quickly finding himself once again on the outside of the social cliques? We heard from a fellow WSU student that Kohberger made rude comments early on that turned off his fellow grad students, and as a result, he wasn't getting invitations to the after-hours social gatherings. Did this rejection trigger the old bad feelings from his middle school and high school days? Had he been full of hope, only to find himself once again on the outskirts of social life? I think this may have played a part in setting off this explosive rage that he allegedly displayed on November 13th. Did Kohberger also maybe find the stress of working on his PhD along with having to teach too much? When I worked on my master's degree, I was a teaching assistant, and the first few months were horrendous. I was so stressed out. I had to write lesson plans to teach my own 2 classes, and then I had to study and write papers for my master's classes. It took me about 6 months to figure it all out and to start to feel a little less anxious. Is it possible Bryan didn't realize how much work all of this was going to be, and his way of freaking out was to become rude and argumentative and to try and sabotage his female students? It seems like it didn't take long for Kohberger to implode after arriving in Washington. I have to believe he went there with a serious goal of getting his PhD. I can't fathom that he would move clear across the country simply with the goal of setting his evil plan for harming females into motion. It feels like this plan began being hatched in Washington, and that the planning began pretty much right within the first month or so. We know from the probable cause affidavit for Kohberger's arrest that he was spotted in Moscow, Idaho, as early as August 21st. That's when he was detained as part of a traffic stop. It was during that stop that the Moscow police recorded Kohberger's cell phone number ending in 8458. I believe this stop is connected to the crime, as in Kohberger was in Moscow that day, either trawling for victims for his planned crime, or he had already settled on the targets, and he was there to watch them. The descriptions of Kohberger's behavior toward his department's professors tell me that his narcissism and antisocial personality were out of control at that point. According to an article I read entitled Shady Strategic Behavior, Recognizing Strategies of the Dark Triad Followers, if someone becomes aggressive after negative feedback, it's a red flag that person is a narcissist. The same article said that questioning authority figures, rules, and the status quo is a red flag signaling psychopathy. And the misogynistic ways in which Kohberger was treating his female students and classmates screams of him being an incel. Misogynistic, in case you don't know, according to Merriam-Webster, means feeling, showing, or characterized by hatred of or prejudice toward women. Many criminal profilers believed before anyone was arrested in this case that it might be the work of an incel or involuntary celibate, meaning someone who can't find a partner who's willing to be intimate with them. And we know that incels hate women. The supreme gentleman, Elliot Rodger, took the lives of 6 people and injured 14 others on May 23rd of 2014 in Isla Vista, California. Rodger said this in his manifesto: "The day of retribution is mainly my war against women for rejecting me and depriving me of sex and love. My hatred of the female gender could not grow stronger." End quote. A white paper on the Science Direct website entitled Unwanted Celibacy is associated with misogynistic attitudes even after controlling for personality, said this, and I quote, "We suggest that unwanted celibacy is linked to sexism and misogyny in some men because frustration and unhappiness due to unwanted celibacy may produce antipathy toward those they desire but who are perceived to be rejecting them, women." End quote. Antipathy means a strong feeling of dislike. The same white paper said that prior research indicated that men who are rejected by women often react with anger and aggression, and sometimes with homicidal violence. It said, and I quote, "To the extent that unwanted celibacy involves experiences of romantic rejection, unwanted celibacy may lead to anger, aggression, and misogyny toward women in general." End quote. Making Kohberger a teaching assistant, giving him the power to grade the work of females, was a huge mistake. Of course, the professors at WSU could not have known ahead of time what Bryan Kohberger was really like. His recommendation from Professor Bolger of DeSales University, of course, led the professors at WSU to believe that Kohberger was a stable human being who treated everyone, including females, with respect. But individuals with psychopathy can trick people. According to experts, people with psychopathy tend to display a combination of shallow emotions, absence of regret or remorse, impulsivity, criminology, and charm. Bingo! Sounds like someone we know. I suspect Kohberger is a psychopath, and that he is able to display charm when he needs to. I also suspect that he used charm to trick the Department of Criminology at WSU and also Professor Bolger into viewing him as a stable young man with great potential and a wonderful future ahead of him. We've heard that when he attended a routine medical appointment a few days after the crime, the female office staff found him a very charming, polite young man. Clearly, Kohberger was able to dig deep and bring out that charm when he needed it, and if you didn't look too deeply into his eyes and didn't interact with him for any length of time, you might not pick up on the simmering rage inside and his odd, strange, scary vibe. When Kohberger began arguing with his professors, when he was going out of his way to grade his female students with a harsher scale, and when he was subjecting his female colleagues to his misogynistic behaviors, did he not realize that his days at WSU would be numbered? Or did he realize but just not care? Was he disappearing into his dark fantasies, so much so that he could no longer see straight? Were his parents so far away that they could not sense that something was very wrong? And when Kohberger arrived back home in Pennsylvania for the holidays, and when he received the news that he was fired from his teaching assistant position, did he tell his parents, or did he keep it on the down low? Also, was he even planning to return to WSU at that point? I mean, his white Elantra was always going to be a problem in Pullman and Moscow. Until someone was arrested for the crime, that Hyundai Elantra was always going to be like a huge white target. It's hard for me to believe that Kohberger intended to drive that back to Pullman after the holidays. So many questions. I'm sorry that I don't have all the answers. I suspect only Bryan Kohberger knows the truth about what he was planning to do once his Christmas vacation was over and it was time to head back to WSU. What I think we can all answer now, though, is why he harmed 3 of the students in Moscow. This guy stinks of being an incel, of the Elliot Rodger ilk, and I stand by my belief that Papa Roger was Kohberger, and he chose that name as an homage to the Supreme Gentleman. By the way, Latah prosecuting attorney Bill Thompson filed new documents today in the Latah County Magistrate Court. Those documents included a new affidavit and a court memo. Of course, no one but the investigators knows what's in those documents yet, as they've not been made public, unless some unnamed source close to the investigation who has a relationship with News Nation decides to spill the beans. Stay tuned until the next time on Bedcrime Stories. Did you enjoy your time with me today? If so, smash that like button, subscribe to my channel, leave me a comment, consider a membership, and I'll see you next time.